No taxation without representation. 200 years of exploitation in the capital of this nation. No representation in the capital of this nation. 200 years of exploitation. Give the people their right to vote. Someone asked me, was it true? The voting rights of the district were long overdue.
That was Sweet Honey in the Rock with Give the People Their Right to Vote. Hello and welcome to Shadow Politics, an hour-long grassroots talk show which will attempt to shine a light on the issues that you care about. I'm your host, United States Senator Michael D. Brown, coming to you live from the District of Columbia, America's last colony. I'm joined by my co-host, Marilia Duffels, and together we hope our show will start a dialogue with America about the issues that are important to you and affect the lives of all of us. So feel free to call in and be part of the conversation at 888-627-6008. Marilia, how are you?
I'm doing great, Mike. How are you? It's nice to hear you, even though I've just seen you this week.
Yeah, I know. We had lunch together. It was great.
It was.
At the Democratic Club.
Yes.
I forgot to tell you, sometimes they give you a test when you walk in, and they forgot to give you a heads up. And if they ask you who the greatest president in American history was, you can't say like Ronald Reagan or they'll let you in. You have to say, Franklin Roosevelt or John F. Kennedy or somebody.
Well, I'm glad they didn't ask me because I think I failed.
It's because you're looking more like a Democrat these days. So they weren't suspect.
I've always been a bleeding heart.
They're also preoccupied with trying to figure out whether you've been vaccinated or not,
Yeah, that's right. It made him forget.
Yeah, I had to go back to my car and get my vaccination certificate. Anyway, tonight we're supposed to have the Reverend Jesse Jackson on the show. Reverend Jackson, thank you for being on the show.
How are you, my brother? How are you?
I'm good, and we so much appreciate it. And for our listeners out there, this is a person that needs no introduction, a formidable civil rights leader, colleague of Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement in the South ever since he was in college, ran for president twice. I'm proud to say, Reverend Jackson, that I worked with Mal Warwick. I had a consulting firm, and I worked with on your presidential campaign in 1984 with Mal Warwick from San Francisco. And I'm very proud of that. You got 21% of the primary vote and 29% of the primary vote in 1988. We know that the great Shirley Chisholm is very often spoken of as the first nominee of a party for president, African American nominee, but you certainly were the first really, really credible one. And we're happy to have you on the show. And of course, you were the first United States Senator for the district.
Sure did a great job. She broke the ice.
Yes, she was an amazing person. So, Marilia, do you have a question for the Reverend?
Hello, Reverend Jackson. It's such a pleasure to meet you on
How
air.
Are you?
I'm fine, thank you, and Happy New Year to you.
God bless you.
So, thank you. Mike was saying that you're impressive. 1984, third place in the primary, and in 1988 you ran again, got another impressive 29% behind Dukakis. So with that behind you and everything else you've accomplished, what is it that motivated you to run for shadow senator?
Well, it's a dignity, really. D.C. is qualified to be a state. It has enough people, enough economy, and all this makes up a state. It has distinct territory. I've been infringed upon by Virginia and Maryland, but the state should be represented directly and indirectly. So I felt need to run for D.C. statehood since it's make these statehood an issue on the ballot.
Well, let me ask you, Reverend, though I've been told by many of the people that worked with you on that in those days that when you had the position, you were more of an activist than we are today.
Oh, yeah.
I know you and Reverend Barber just got arrested in front of the Capitol protesting the Senate's inability to pass voting rights legislation. So why do you think there was more activism back then than there is now on this particular issue? Do you have any feeling about that?
Because I acted. I felt that was my obligation to act, make visible the plight of DC citizens. More people than 7 states pay more taxes than about 10 at that time states. Most of them in Vietnam, percentage-wise, and almost in every state in the country. So we paid enough taxes, we worked enough, we bled enough, and died enough. Deserve to be represented by ourselves in the state government, federal government.
And how important is activism? What does activism do for the movement? Does it provide it with energy? You know, I look towards the civil rights movement in the South and the things that you guys did, you and Reverend King and the other people that were involved in the movement in the South. What is it about activism that's important to us? You know, because what we do here, Reverend, is we go up and we try to explain to Congress why it's okay for us to be a state. And I think they all know that it's okay for us to be a state, but we're not very, we don't, I've been arrested, but we don't do that much anymore. How important is that?
Well, I'm going to visit every senator. They gave me an appointment, all 100 of them, and began to look at what was the agenda they had and what our needs were. And there's a crisis. You pull people together, tell them the short-term problem solution is X. If we're going to say this, Y and Z. It depends upon the leadership.
Well, you know that I just mentioned this on the show just before you came on, but in 1984, I stood in San Francisco on the floor of the convention, and I heard you give a speech. I heard you give a speech that when you first came out on the stage, there were people that booed you, and when you left, those same people stood and applauded for you. It was one of the most amazing speeches I've ever heard, and one of the most amazing reactions I've ever seen. Now, with America so divided, and President Biden with a 24% approval rating on bringing Americans together, what do you think we need to say? What are those things we need to say to bring people together? I think
he deserves a better rating than that. For example, the pandemic, which is worldwide, killing almost 1 million Americans, many people around the world, he inherited that situation. The hostility of Trump and his people, willing to overthrow the government if they can. Second insurrection, one kicked up civil war, and this one here. So no matter what he does, I've seen people who had toothache, chewing ice and picking their dentist. That's Trump. He's stupid. It's absurd, So I think that he has done a good job. There are more people working. There's a better atmosphere in Washington today. And the speech he gave, I think he gave a little too much too late. But I think that we have to make it a long time ourselves. If we set the climate, we have a friend who will help us.
Is he doing enough for black people? Are black people still part of the Biden coalition? Will they be there in 2022?
I hope they will, because the alternative is Trump. And that's unacceptable. Fascism. So we deserve better than that. I saw Steve Delaware when he was Humphrey. After Johnson was eliminated, we ended up getting Nixon. So I thought we shouldn't do Delaware. We should push forward our agenda, fight for it, march for it, but don't assume that anything is better than what we got. It's not.
Yeah.
Okay.
Aurelia, you have anything?
Brown?
Yes.
I got to go, buddy. Okay.
Okay. Reverend, thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate your time. We appreciate your service to America. And let me tell you that I'm honored to be a shadow. I'm honored to be a United States Senator from the District of Columbia, following in your footsteps, I hope. Thank you.
Indeed.
Let me say to all of you who listen tonight, I need you to join to make the Rainbow a strong organization, multiracial, multicultural, rainbowpush.org, rainbowpush.org. Simple membership, okay? Thank you, Michael.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend.
Well, it was nice to get a few words in from the Reverend. Obviously, he didn't feel like he could stay with us very long. Like I say, he's 80 years old, and we appreciate that he took time to come and talk to us. So
that was really, really kind.
Yeah.
He's accomplished so much. You think, gosh, how do you stand on top of his accomplishments and still stand tall and strong with all that he's been through? He was then Martin Luther King. We can't forget that.
Yeah,
that's a long time ago, and a lot of strife and a lot of fighting and a lot of stress.
Yeah, and things have changed so much. Now that you bring that up, I used to do consulting work for a guy named Fritz Hollings.
Oh my God.
Fritz was the youngest governor in the history of America. He was the governor of South Carolina. And when I worked for him, he was a United States Senator. Mm-hmm. But Jackson used to come to things. And Fritz, Senator Hollings would be there, and he would remind people that even though that they were colleagues and they were friends, when Jackson graduated from high school and Fritz was governor, mm-hmm. he kept Jackson from having his picture taken in front of the Capitol because African American students weren't allowed to do that in those days. Can you imagine that?
That's just gobsmacking, isn't it? I mean, I can't see that from Hollings, even though he is, but certainly Thurmond. I mean, he was a Dixiecrat.
Yeah, and right, and it was, they did it. I don't know what it. Yeah, I don't. Knowing Hollings, I agree with you. I don't think that was his heart, but
right.
That's what people thought. It's interesting if you study the evolution of the District of Columbia and how it became, came into existence and how it was governed. You'll see that after the Civil War, the Republicans made a really, really strong effort in Washington, D.C. to bring African Americans to Washington, D.C. and to bestow rights on them. There's a book called A Lesson for All the Land by Kate Mazur, which outlines the fact that Republicans allowed freed slaves to do all sorts of interesting things in Washington that they weren't really allowed to do other places. Form social clubs, have certain jobs. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Can I just interject? There are some incredible former residents of Georgetown who were doctors, bankers. In fact, there was a very famous slave, and they have a house in Georgetown, which is exactly where his house was. He was like the first homeowner, and he was a banker. His name was Yarrow Mahmoud, and you can read all about him in the Georgetown Library. So you're absolutely right. They were allowed to do these things, and it just amazes me. There was another one in Georgetown who was an MD. He actually had an office on 27th Street and saw patients. And it's just mind-boggling to me because that was coexisting with slaves at that time.
Well, but what also came of that was the idea that they didn't believe they were allowed to have social clubs and be professionals, but they didn't believe that white people and black people should be in the same social clubs.
Right.
Believed in segregation. And that really set the kind of informally set the stage for what was to take place for the next 100 years. That the separate but equal thing that we kind of here in Washington D.C. we kind of invented separate but equal, and it wasn't until the Brown versus Board of Education, of course, that was knocked down by the Supreme Court. And by the way, we should just add that one of the plaintiffs in the case was a girl that was a student here in Washington D.C. So, but if you study the history of Washington, you will find the history of America. It's very interesting how things developed here. And now we have a city that, we're the most liberal. It drives me nuts that we don't have voting representation, as you well know. Yeah. But, isn't because of what we do, Marilia, because of what you do and what I do and all the people of Washington, D.C., so many of us do, isn't this like telling the people of Detroit they can't drive cars? Or saying to people in L.A. you can't go to the movies? You can make the movies, but you just can't go watch them. It's just crazy, isn't it?
Yes, indeed. You're absolutely right about that.
Yeah, and we need everybody out there to stand up. It's been annoying me, and I got to tell you, the Democrats are right up there annoying me with the Republicans because the Democrats are treating us, our disenfranchised status, as if it doesn't, it's some dirty little secret that they don't want to talk about when they're talking about voting rights. They talk about two voting rights bills that are before the United States Senate right now, the Right to Vote Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. But there's also a third piece of legislation, which, like the other two pieces of legislation, have passed the United States House of Representatives and is in the Senate with 47 co-sponsors, and that's the Washington, D.C. Admission Act, which would make us a state and would enfranchise, as Reverend Jackson points out, more people than there are in two states, Wyoming and Vermont. And Jackson was the senator, as he pointed out. There were 10 states that had the same population as D.C. At one time, the population of D.C. was 850,000. So it's gone down over the years. It's been going back up several years. But at one point, it was 850,000. And that's another thing that people don't, one of the other little nuances of our involuntary servitude is that even when it comes from president, we don't have an equal vote. Because when we're 850,000, we should have had 4 electoral votes, but we only got 3 based on population, but we only got 3 because the constitutional amendment, 23rd Amendment, which establishes our right to vote for president, as amazing as that is, we didn't have the right to vote for president, says that we can have no more votes than that of the smallest state. So no matter, even if we had a population of 10 million, we would still only have 3 electoral votes. So, we got to stop this nonsense, man. We've got more veterans. We have 30,000 veterans who have served their country. And I don't know how we say to them that they can't have the same rights as somebody that lives in Maryland or Virginia who's never served. I just don't know how we can do that in good conscience.
I don't understand either. And there's been big push, not least of which has been by you, and for many years, and nothing gets done. It is, as they say, political, and somebody is gaining from this. Somebody in power is gaining from this, as you know.
Yeah, and that's the thing. We say it all the time, but Frederick Douglass said it. That power concedes nothing without a demand, never, and it never will. And what we do is we don't demand. We send our 2 most compromised people up to Capitol Hill to lobby. We send the mayor and the chairman of the city council. Now, these are people that need to ask the federal government for $800 million a year. And they also understand that ultimately Congress has control of the city. So, we live in their house, basically. So, I ask you, how tough would you be with me if you lived in my house and I gave you $800 million a year? Would you, what would you say to me?
Right.
If you don't do this for me, I swear I'm gonna not let you give me any more money anymore. What? Right? We need somebody to make a demand. We don't. We go up there and we try to convince them that this is okay. We say the Constitution doesn't say anything about taking our right to representation away. They know that. They all know that. We don't need to keep on telling it. Right. They know that. It's all about partisan politics. And Tom Davis, we had him on last week, and I asked him this. He said to me one time, there's only two things you can do to a politician. You can either help them or you can hurt them. So we can't help anybody because we don't have a vote. We can't help. No, you can't. That's why Eleanor Holmes Norton is so amazing, is because she has nothing to trade and she still gets things done. But, I can't vote for your, coal bill, Senator Manchin, if you vote for my statehood bill, because I got no vote. But, we need to find a way to hurt them. We need to, West Virginia is really close, and we need to get 10,000 people to go over there and protest and say, Joe, remember you're a Democrat,
Right.
I mean,
change his mind, though. And what me is, the Congress criticizes the way the district has been run. And I have to say that I do agree with it being the recipient of the lack of services or the poor services, although it must be said they have improved since the days of Marion Barry. Wouldn't you think that they would think, okay, if they're allowed into the, quote, big league of Congress with the right, with statehood, don't you think that it would probably be run better than the system that is running it now, is the DC Council?
Well, it's so funny that so strange that you should say that, Marulia, because if you this just sounds absolutely crazy, but I believe it's true. If you look at banana republics, look at countries in the Caribbean which did not have control over their own destiny, countries that were run by outside governments, you see corruption all over the place, and you see inefficiencies all over the place. And I don't think that's so much different than the District of Columbia.
That's a very good point. And not just the Caribbean, but Central America, South America.
And you see, and it's one of the first things Tom Davis said last week on the show was about the corruption in D.C. And Marion Barry was one of my favorite people in Washington politics. He was so good to me. He was such a great guy. I think of him as a wonderful person. But you know what? Every time I drive down to Anacostia, I say to myself, this man was in power for 40 years. What did he do for the people that elected him?
Right.
Since I've been elected, we've had Harry Thomas go to jail. He's now running for an office in our delegation. We've had Michael Brown go to jail. We had Jack.
Of course. Michael A. Brown, right?
Michael A. Brown. We had Jack Evans. We had Kwame Brown. We've had. There's a lot of corruption in DC government.
There really is.
And you're right. That is part of it because we have so many talented people in this town, but we focus on national politics. and you can't run for Senate with a vote in the district or for Congress, and that makes a difference. We when I was first elected, we gave the keys to the city to a guy who was an African American senator from Massachusetts named Ed Brooke.
Yep.
Brooke was a Washingtonian. He went to the Second World War, and he fought in a segregated unit. And he came back to Washington, and he wanted to get involved with politics. He wanted to make a change, and there was nothing to run for. There was no elected mayor. There was no elected school board. There were no elected offices of any sort. So he moved to Massachusetts, where he became a legend. He was a senator for many, many years, and several terms. And we gave him the keys to the city because he was the one that was our primary person in the Senate to get the D.C. Voting Rights Act, which would have given us two voting senators and a voting Congress. He got it through the Senate, and it wasn't ratified by the state, so it never became law. But yeah, we've lost so many talented people like Ed Brooke, and I think a lot of the corruption and stuff that goes on in Washington is because we all focus on national politics. We don't focus on what's happening here.
I think that's right.
Well, my dear, we have come to the end of another show. I'm glad that we were able to get the Reverend on for some time. And, we hope that we'll have an amazing guest again for you next week. I hope you have some fun things coming up in the week ahead. We're going to try to get another person on the show next week that will be an interesting guest, and we'll move forward. I appreciate you being on the show every week. That we try to send a song out at the end of the show. We dedicate it to the people that have been on the show, and today's song is from Sly and the Family Stone. It goes out to the Reverend and everybody in the Rainbow Coalition. Here's Everyday People. We'll see you next week.
Thank you, Mike. You're amazing. You bring such depth to this show.